You are listening to the Move the Dirt podcast. The information provided in this podcast is for educational purposes only. It is not intended to provide medical, legal, or any other professional advice. You should always seek advice from an appropriately qualified and experienced professional.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. Today, I have a very special guest. I am joined by the one and only Dr. Sarah Myhill. Hello, Sarah. It's absolutely lovely to see you again. Thank you for joining us.
My absolute pleasure, Bill.
So, for those of you that don't know Sarah, I was fortunate enough to spend a weekend in her company recently at her beautiful farm. So I spent a weekend there with 11 others who were all fantastic. It was a great bunch. And Sarah took us through various areas of medicine and general health. And for anyone who hasn't attended one of Sarah's workshops, it is one of the best weekends that you will have. Please do visit her site, but we'll go into that in more detail later. So, Sarah, for anyone that doesn't know you, may I ask you to take a moment to introduce yourself, please?
Bless you, of course, Bill, yes. I'm a medical doctor. I qualified in 1981 from the Middlesex Hospital Medical School, and I went straight into general practice. So I did my year's house job, and I've been working as a general practitioner since 1982. And of course, I came out top of my year at medical school and went into general practice thinking, I know it all. And within the first week or two, realised that I knew nothing. I was a hopeless doctor. And opened my eyes was people coming into surgery saying, I've got chilblains. Why have I got chilblains? I've got headaches. Why have I got headaches? I suffer from asthma. What's causing my asthma? None of those questions had been addressed at medical school. It was all about, headache is paracetamol deficiency and depression is antidepressant deficiency and irritable bowel syndrome is, antispasmodic deficiency and so on. It was a completely drug-oriented approach. So, of course, initially I said to my patients, let's do a blood test and then come back. And I only did that in order to buy a bit of time, so I go rushing back to my books and see if I find an answer.
And did you find the answer, Sarah?
No, not only did I not find the answers are not in the medical books today, 40 plus years on.
Right.
So, so with any problem, the first thing is you always have to look at the mechanisms, ask the question why. And fast forward to the present day, I now realise that so much disease is driven by diet, either because of allergy to foods, because of the upper fermenting gut, or it's driven by poor energy delivery mechanisms, which has much to do with thyroid function, which is a very, very common problem, or my special area of interest. And by the end of the 1990s, I was chastised. My wrists were slapped because my prescribing budget was so low. Therefore, I must be a bad doctor.
So, sorry, let me get that straight in my mind. So, you found yourself in difficulties because you were not prescribing a certain level of medication?
Correct. I was treating diabetes through diet. I was treating high cholesterol levels, through diet. I was treating arthritis, irritable bowel syndrome, migraine through diet and supplements and detoxification regimes. But because the doctor's success rate is judged by their prescribing budget, mine was very tiny, so therefore I must be a bad doctor. So that the bottom line is, by the late 1990s, I didn't have the clinical freedoms that I needed to be a doctor, to function well. So at that point, I jumped sideways. I went into independent practice in 2000. And because I thought my ideas were jolly good ones, because guess what? I was actually curing patients instead of leaving them on symptom-suppressing drugs for life. I built a website because my view is all this information should be available freely as available as possible. And that's when the complaints started coming in. The doctors didn't like it. The internet trolls didn't like it. The fact that the patients were better was irrelevant. That was just didn't seem to be important. The fact that I was saying, yes, try cutting out dairy products for your colicky, screaming baby who's got 3-month colic. Try treating children with recurrent tonsillitis with dairy-free, low-yeast diets, cutting out the sugar. Try abolishing your migraines with elimination diets and ketogenic diets. All these very, very simple procedures, which have been in the medical world for hundreds of years. Socrates knew about this, didn't he? He was the so-called the father of medicine,
Yes.
He would say, let medicine be thy food and food be thy medicine. It all starts off with what we eat. And modern diets are so appalling these days. They are addictive, full of sugars, full of carbohydrates, full of ultra-processed foods, that they are driving our current epidemics of dementia, heart disease and cancer. So, I wanted to develop a practice of medicine whereby not only could we address current problems that people have, whatever that may be, fatigue, muscle pain, arthritis, asthma, psychosis, urticaria, whatever, but we could also allow people to live life to its full potential. And
Right.
that's beautifully illustrated by an old boy who I looked after, who I think you just missed, Tony. He's been a friend of mine for some years now. 5, I could see he was struggling a bit to live independently. So I said, come and live in my granny flat, where I fed him a paleo ketogenic diet, gave him some vitamins and minerals. He was very sociable. So, breakfast and supper, he'd come in and eat with the tribe, and we'd talk about the stories of the day and our plans and so on. And he died last October, aged 102, with no pathology. His mind was as sharp as a tack. We've got a photograph of him the day before he died signing some of his books. He had no heart disease. He had no cancer. He had a collapsed vertebra and he was in pain, and that was troubling him. And his sight was not good and his hearing was not good, but no major pathologies. And that's how we should all go. We should all live life to a high level, physically and mentally, and then when the moment comes, drop off our perch very suddenly. That's what we all want. Don't wait until you get some horrible disease before deciding, well, I better do something about this. Do it now.
Do it now.
As I say to all my patients, just do it now. The longest journey starts with the first step. Put in place these interventions, which are simple, available to all, relatively inexpensive, and you can live life to its full potential. So don't wait to get Parkinson's disease before doing something about it. Don't wait before you start losing your memory. Get on with it now.
Sarah, that's all amazing to start with. Thank you. That gives us a fantastic launch pad to move on. I am still reeling a little bit from the comment you made a few minutes ago when you said that you really started to have issues. You had your wrist slapped for not prescribing enough. Am I correct in some of the research I've done into your background? You've been in practice since the early 90s, I understand.
Yep.
And you have never had a complaint from a patient.
Nope.
Is that correct?
Correct.
Never. Wow. Okay. But if I understand correctly, you are also the most investigated medical doctor
in the history of the General Medical Council.
Okay.
Correct.
So can you help me as a non-doctor, a non-clinician? How does someone who doesn't have a single complaint from a patient end up as the most investigated doctor? I don't quite follow.
Well, what it tells us is there is something very wrong with our medical regulator, the General Medical Council. And the General Medical Council has large investments in Big Pharma and in Big Food. It's also bankrolled by the Department of Health. So, as we know, all institutions become self-serving. And the General Medical Council was centrally involved in permitting the rollout of the COVID jab, because honest doctors who, when they saw problems arising from this COVID jab, people being damaged, people developing pathologies, people dying following a COVID jab, when they went public over these and detailed their concerns, they were struck off by the General Medical Council. So what we have are honest doctors trying to do their best and flag up, concerns that they see with their own eyes being punished as a result. And it's a little bit like that. That's a microcosm of what's been happening to me over the last 25 years. There I am, whistleblowing on the medical profession, writing books, giving lectures, putting all my stuff on a website saying we don't just treat people, we can cure them, we can reverse pathology with simple naturopathic techniques, not techniques that I've invented. These have been available to us since Hippocrates, the father of medicine, who said, let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food. So much can be done with very traditional, good nursing care, good medical care, good naturopathic medicine, diet, supplements, detox regimes, maybe some herbals, maybe some homeopathics, sorting out hormone problems like thyroid problems and adrenal problems. Very simple, basic medicine that's available to all. But the problem with this sort of medicine is it doesn't make money for anybody. It doesn't, and the problem with doctors these days is they are educated by Big Pharma, and Big Pharma's mantra is a patient cured is a customer lost. My grandparents were doctors. They practiced medicine in the 1920s and the 1930s and the 1940s, and in that era, all medicine was private, so patients had to pay to come and see them. And when the NHS came into existence in 1948, I remember them saying now, that was the best day of their lives because suddenly they could treat everybody. And the NHS worked brilliantly through the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. It was a fantastic service. And I know that because my father and my uncle worked within the NHS and they provide a fantastic service for local people. Problems arose in the 90s when suddenly the whole of the NHS was monetized. Everything had a value and doctors were paid to do jobs. And so they were financially incentivized to do the wrong things. And one practice in particular that I know of, which I daren't name, of course, they chose to have an in-house pharmacy. And of course, many GP surgeries now have an in-house pharmacy. And what that means is they are financially incentivized to prescribe. This is why I got my wrist slapped, because I wasn't
Right.
making money
Yeah.
from practice because I wasn't prescribing drugs. So one practice I know of, if a child came in with a runny nose, they had to go out with a prescription for an antibiotic, for Calpol, a fever suppressant, and a cough suppressant. And that made the practice a tenner, which in the 90s was good money. So, suddenly doctors are doing things not for the best interest of that patient. And we know that giving antibiotics to children with coughs and colds is not good medicine. Not for the benefit of the patient, but for the financial vested interest of that prescribing doctor and the practice. And that now pretty much extends to much of medicine. In America, it's even worse because not only are they paid there to prescribe, they make money out of the prescriptions, they also get kickbacks for ordering tests. So, if somebody who's ill goes to see a doctor, they say, well, we want to do an MRI scan of the head and the chest, and we want to do blood tests A, B, C, D, and they run out a bill of thousands of pounds for the patient or thousands of dollars for the patients, and then they get kickbacks from the companies who run the tests.
Right. Okay.
So they are not acting in the patient's best interest. They are acting in their own personal financial interests, and that is absolutely wrong. It's dishonest medicine. And the GMC should be clamping down on that, but they're not. That has been permitted. That is the way medicine is run in this country.
That's incredible to hear that. It's very interesting you talk about the pharmacies within the GP practices. My own GP practice has a pharmacy, but it sounds as though that not only are we in a position where we're running a medical system where we're chasing symptoms and trying to suppress symptoms, but that doctors may be prescribing medication which is not even required.
Correct. I mean, the most egregious example of this is the use of statins. Now, the atorvastatin, which is the most prescribed statin in the world, is worth about $1 trillion a year. That is $1 billion. It's $1 million dollars. It's
Wow.
I can't even imagine that amount of money. But Dr. Aseem Malhotra, wonderful cardiologist, who is now Robert Kennedy's right-hand man in the Make America Healthy Again campaign. He's produced some first-hand research of his own and has written a book called A Statin-Free Life. And what we discover from that book and his research is that the benefits of statins are almost zero. In fact, it's quite likely that there are very, very few benefits from statins, and they are actually a major risk factor for dementia and for cancer. which we are seeing going through the roof at the moment, both of them.
Yes, that's very interesting because we are, I think, certainly for the first time in my lifetime, and it may be that I've just become more aware of it as I'm getting older myself, and therefore I know more people that are a little older. But I don't recall seeing the levels of dementia and Alzheimer's when I was young.
Correct. I mean, when I was at medical school in the 1970s, and I remember being in a neurological outpatient and the consultant getting terribly excited and saying, oh, we've got this new case coming in, and if you see one case in your lifetime, you'll be a lucky person, sort of thing. And this lady came in with her husband, and initially she seemed quite okay, and then she started confabulating and repeating herself and making things up, and we realised she was in the early stage of a dementia. And he said, if you can remember this name for finals, you'll pass with flying colours. Remember, Alzheimer's. Can you remember that? No, Alzheimer's. And we all went home repeating, Alzheimer's, mustn't forget that, mustn't forget that. But now it's a household word. So dementia almost didn't exist in the 1970s. And now it's the commonest cause of death in this country. It's gone from 0 to 100 miles an hour like nothing else. It's just a terrible thing. And dementia is the worst form of death. It's the worst form because you lose your mind. And as soon as you lose your brain, well, you're not you anymore, are you?
No, indeed. I understand from some books that I've read, a book that springs to mind in particular is a book by Dr. Malcolm Kendrick.
Yes, he's a great guy, isn't he?
Great cholesterol con. That left me, again, it's a fantastic book, but from what you're saying here, we think there's possibly a link between statins and some of these mental health conditions.
Huge, yes. I mean, cholesterol is an essential fat for the body. Our brains have got a vast amount of cholesterol in them. The immune system cannot function without cholesterol. We need cholesterol to make adrenal hormones. It's an essential molecule. I can show you studies where the higher your cholesterol is, the longer you live. I like to see the cholesterol above 6, maybe 7 at the very least. But the government guidelines, or rather the Big Pharma driven guidelines, they want the cholesterol to be below 5 in some cases. I mean, it's outrageous. That means you're starving your brains of fat, you're starving your immune system of fat, and therefore the brain can't work, dementia, the immune system can't work, so you become immunosuppressed. But they are a disaster. And it's worse than that because statins, the mechanism by which they work, also impairs energy delivery mechanisms. And a major side effect of statins is fatigue and muscle pain. So they're very bad drugs.
And it just seems, again, there's a lot of money involved, and hence that's why they're being pushed.
About $1 trillion to be precise.
Incredible. So I understand, just sort of circling back a little and picking up on this GMC issue. Something which I found very interesting from my own research was looking into the MHRA. And there was a particular gentleman that had marketed a product, and I'd done quite extensive research into that, and I learned, much to my absolute despair, that a regulator was being funded. I think upwards of 80% of its funding came from the very organisations that it was supposed to be regulating.
Correct. A regulator should be representing the patients.
Yes.
You and me. Is this product, has it been properly tested? Is it safe for these people? June Rain, who was the chair of the MHRA during the COVID infection time, when it came to the rollout of the COVID jabs, her comment was, we are no longer a regulator, we are an enabler. So they're there to facilitate the rollout, which is just completely wrong. It's against the whole ethos of the MHRA. They were put there to regulate, to protect us. And they're not. They're just looking after the interests of Big Pharma. Why? Because they're funded by Big Pharma.
Yes, and I think this is something that, in general, the public are not aware of. I've had conversations talking about the MHRA to people, and they will say to me, you're mad. Of course they're independent. And I say to them, go away and look. you'll find what I found. With the position with the GMC, Sarah, as I mentioned earlier, you're the most investigated doctor. Where do you stand at the moment in terms of outcomes of those investigations?
Well, until a couple of years ago, the score was Myhill 39, the General Medical Council nil.
Right.
In 2020, I gave up my license to practice medicine because I was just getting fed up with being continuously prosecuted. So I no longer practice as a doctor, I practice as a naturopathic physician. And all that means is I can't prescribe drugs. Well, guess what? That's little loss because, I don't use drugs anyway, or very rarely have a call for. So I gave up my license to practice medicine. I ceased paying insurance fees. I applied to deregister from the GMC. Their response to that was to open another 5 investigations. They wanted me to stay on their books. Now, the reason for that, I think, again, is political. During the 1980s and the 90s, I was actively campaigning. When I was in the 1990s, I was working in a mining community there, and many of the miners suffered from pneumoconiosis, and I was, flagging up that issue as best as I could. In the 90s, I then moved to a farming area on the Welsh borders, and I realised that many of the farmers were suffering from sheep dip flu, which essentially is pesticide poisoning. It's poisoning by organophosphate chemicals. And then, of course, I started seeing Gulf War veterans, and they too had been poisoned by chemical warfare in the Gulf. And all these issues were being denied by the powers that be. I was involved in government inquiries into organophosphate poisoning, Gulf War syndrome, silicone breast implants, and the poisoning from that. And I started to appear on programs like Dispatches and Panorama and Newsnight with Trevor, and flagging out the problems of aspartame and all that sort of stuff. And I think that the government says to the GMC, we need to silence this woman. We don't want her talking on BBC Radio 4 and Woman's Hour and local radio and independent television channels because she's putting out an anti-establishment message.
Right.
Now, if a TV company wants to interview a doctor, the first thing they do is they go and look at the General Medical Council record to see if there are any problems with them. And of course, they look at my record. Oh, she's being investigated. Oh, she's being investigated. She must be a bad doctor. So that's why the GMC still want me on their list, even though I haven't paid any fees for 5 years. And normally, if you don't pay fees, you're off, before you can say Jack Robinson.
Right.
They want me on the list so that if any newspaper goes, oh, she's a bad doctor, she's being investigated, we're not going to have her. So essentially, it killed my ability to campaign at a national level. It doesn't stop me, of course, saying exactly what I think to guys like yourself. And as I say, if as a result of listening to this podcast, we change one person's mind and move them in the right direction, then that's an hour of my time and your time well spent.
Yes, no, absolutely. And I think my first interaction with a naturopathic doctor in my own life was again what started me looking into medicine and looking at it from a different perspective. I've mentioned this on the podcast previously, but I had a recurring cough for on and off for about 20 years. And about 10 years ago, it was getting worse and worse, and I could feel myself declining. And I'd gone back and forth to the GP on and off for about 20 years. But in this period in particular, I'd had 7 courses of antibiotics, one after the other. I went back to the GP and they said to me, right, here's another course of antibiotics, at which point I respectfully said to them, I've had 7 courses now. There's clearly, something's not right. It's not working. At which point they said, right, just take this one last course. If it doesn't work, come back. So as I pretty much anticipated, it didn't work. I went back. And much to my horror, we moved from them having done no formal investigations into me having a cough, giving me 8 courses of antibiotics. We went from there to suggesting a cancer pathway. At which point I'd had no investigations. I decided there and then, I was concerned enough to say thank you very much, but no thanks. Walked out. But in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, right, what do I do now? Where do I go?
Of course.
And it was actually my wife that managed to find a local naturopathic doctor. I'd never heard of them at the time. Didn't know what a naturopathic doctor was. My wife said to me after my inquiries, well, according to the doctor's own website, a naturopathic doctor is a doctor who looks into the cause of your problem. And I, in my naivety, turned around to her and said, well, don't all doctors do that? And she said, well, apparently not. So she said, what have you got to lose? I said, well, nothing. She says, you're becoming more and more unwell. I went to the appointment. It was fantastic. The doctor sat with me for nearly 2 hours asking all sorts of questions about right back to whether I was a natural birth or cesarean section, etc., and made some recommendations. And within 48 hours, having suffered, give or take, for 20 years, within 48 hours, I felt like a different person.
Fantastic.
And I'd gone from someone in the appointment who described myself to the doctor as feeling as though I was being poisoned to feeling completely different in 48 hours. That was my own wake-up call.
Yeah.
Now, Sarah, you have very kindly said to me today that you would be happy to do a slot for us on the thyroid.
Yes.
And I know it's something that is of particular interest to a number of people that interact with me on sort of social media, etc. So may I start off perhaps by asking, how would someone know that there might be an issue, or what signs are there that there might be a problem with the thyroid, and what problems can an underactive or overactive thyroid cause in people?
Okay. Well, the commonest thyroid abnormality is an underactive thyroid, and it is very, very common. And all disease, usually presents with symptoms. And so the clinical picture of an underactive thyroid is usually a gradual onset of fatigue. So you just don't have the energy that you should have, and the brain is not as sharp as it should be. The thyroid gland is an essential part of energy delivery mechanisms, and if energy delivery is slow, then of course organs go slow. So it will be implicated in almost any disease. So even if somebody presented with heart disease or cancer or dementia, I would still want to know about their thyroid. But typically it presents with fatigue. Also, another name for the underactive thyroid is mixed edema, i.e. edema, you tend to retain fluid. And that can present, if you get edema of the vocal cords, you can get voice changes. Sometimes the singers say, they can't get their high notes. Advanced cases will present with a very croaky voice like that, as if you've been smoking for the last 20 years, but you haven't. So edema of the vocal cords is a sign. Edema at the wrists, you can get pressure on the nerve at the wrist and develop carpal tunnel syndrome, which is numbness and tingling in those three fingers there and a little bit of the ring finger. Puffy face. If you look at pictures of people who have mixed edema, they often have a round, puffy face with baggy eyes under there. When they wake up, they have crease marks on their face and from the sheets that they've been lying on. If you look at the tongue, it's large, macroglossia as it's called. And if you look at the side of the tongue, along there, you can sometimes get teeth marks indented on the tongue. Swollen ankles, puffy ankles, again, it's typical of mixed edema.
Right.
So those are all symptoms. And then in addition to that, often poor quality hair, so thinning hair, poor quality nails, the nails don't grow well. That's a feature of the underactive thyroid. And then other symptoms, the pulse. Often the pulse goes very slow. So learning to feel your own pulse is a very important and useful tool. The average pulse rate should run between 70 and 75 beats per minute. If it's much below that, again, think underactive thyroid. Core temperature, if you're running cold all the time, so you're intolerant of cold, again, that can be a feature. We also need thyroid hormones for good quality sleep. Thyroid hormones determine the timing of our sleep. So what keeps us awake in the daytime, of course, is lovely bright sunshine. And then as it gets dark, the body produces melatonin. And melatonin is the sleep hormone. That's produced by the pineal gland in the brain. Now, melatonin starts to build up at night, and that stimulates the pituitary gland, another gland in the brain, to produce thyroid-stimulating hormone, and that spikes at midnight, or should spike at midnight. The thyroid-stimulating hormone then goes around the body to the thyroid gland, and the thyroid gland starts to push out T4, which is called T4 because it's got 4 iodine atoms attached to it. And that spikes at about 4 o'clock in the morning. Then T4 is slowly converted into T3, which is the active thyroid hormone. It's got 3 iodine atoms, and that spikes at 5 o'clock in the morning. Then that goes trotting around the body to the adrenal glands and gives them a kick, so that you get a spike of of hormones at maybe 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning. Now, if you haven't got the thyroid hormones driving that or part of that, then you become an owl. And that's another clue. And it's typical of the patients I see with fatigue syndromes that they're often owls. They can't get off to sleep until 11, 12, 1 o'clock in the morning maybe, and then they don't wake naturally until maybe 8, 9 or maybe 10 o'clock in the morning. That's another little clue that there's the thyroid problem. But one of the biggest clues, Bill, that I often see is people tend to put on weight because their whole metabolism is slowed down and they go down into fat-laying mode. And then they try to lose weight. And bless them, they try and lose weight by eating less. Now, that will work for a few days, but quickly the body says, oh, we're in starvation mode, we better stop burning calories. So it shuts down metabolism and you become cold, lethargic and depressed. It's no way to lose weight. The way to lose weight is to change the body's metabolism so we have low levels of insulin. It's insulin, which is the fat hormone. It's insulin that lays down fat. And we spike insulin every time we eat some sugar or carbohydrates. So if you have what's now called a typical English breakfast, I mean, it used to be bacon and eggs. It's now, cereals and toast.
Yes.
You have that, you will spike your blood sugar, you will spike insulin, and you'll be in fat laying down mode. Can't lose weight because you're in fat laying down mode. So high insulin levels are associated with being overweight. So what we have to do is you have to first of all stop spiking insulin. And we do that with a low carbohydrate ketogenic diet. So breakfast is bacon and eggs. Lunch is, tinned fish, a cold meat, a bit of salad. The evening meal is, again, meat and vegetables, a bit of salad, maybe some berries, coconut cream, that sort of thing. Then you stop spiking insulin. Once you stop spiking insulin, you can then fat burn and start the business of losing weight. But to be able to fat burn, you need thyroid hormones.
Right.
If you haven't got the thyroid hormones to fat burn because you're underactive, and that is a very common problem, then you will fat burn with adrenaline instead. And adrenaline is a very uncomfortable hormone. That's what gives you the feeling of being wired but tired. So, people think, right, okay, we'll get onto the ketogenic diet and we'll do that. But they feel terrible because they're fat burning with adrenaline. It's got a name. It's called ketogenic hypoglycemia. It's a dreadful name, but it illustrates the point. You're fat burning with adrenaline. And that, for me, is often a very important clue that that person has an underactive thyroid. And at that point, let's do some tests. Now, the main reason to do the tests, and these are blood tests. I want a blood test for a TSH, a free T4, and a free T3. The main reason for doing the test is, first of all, to make quite sure that person is not overactive, because the last thing you want to do is give thyroid hormones to somebody who's overactive. So the tests are there not to definitively diagnose the underactive thyroid, but to tell us if there is biochemical scope for a trial of thyroid hormones. You see, all diagnosis is retrospective. If a patient comes to see me, they get a differential diagnosis, which is, well, it could be this, it could be that, it could be the other. It's not like, who's the character on who plays House? The
yes,
American comedy. Is it called House? Anyway, but it's about
Hugh Laurie, is it?
Hugh Laurie.
Hugh
That's
Laurie?
He's terrific. He's very funny. But the point is, he's so convinced about his diagnosis, and guess what? He's right every time. But it's not like that in life. In life, we have a differential diagnosis. It could be this, it could be that, it could be a combination of those things. And what really makes the diagnosis is the response to treatment. If that person gets well, then the diagnosis is correct. So we then have to have a trial of thyroid hormones. And first of all, we get people off the carbohydrates so they're not spiking insulin. And then we start very low doses and build them up slowly. And you get to what's called a sweet spot, that suddenly people feel well. They can skip a meal, no problem at all, without running out of energy, without getting adrenaline spikes, without getting anxious and shaky. And they can lose weight much more easily. They can lose weight with not calorie restriction, but time-restricted eating.
Right.
And suddenly their brain clears. They've got the energy to exercise, to have a life, to have fun, and that is transformative for many people. Now, for women, this is a very particular problem because the underactive thyroid is much more common in women than in men. And it often presents, in younger women with premenstrual tension, for example, feel terrible just before period time, again with fatigue. It often strikes at the menopause because female sex hormones, as I call it, give us false energy. They give us energy that we don't really have. And then when they disappear at the menopause, then the fatigue becomes profound. So the underactive thyroid is often unmasked, at the menopause. And any woman with severe menopausal problems, you must investigate the thyroid as a matter of course.
Right.
Any woman who struggles to lose weight. The underactive thyroid is much more common in women than in men. It runs in families very much. So if you have a mother, sister, aunt, uncle, whatever, with an underactive thyroid, you're much more likely to have one. So these are all useful clues that things are not right. The clinical clues, you then look at the clinical picture. You then do the blood test to see if there is scope for a trial of. The ultimate diagnosis is the response to treatment. I've actually written a book about it. I've called it The Underactive Thyroid, and I've been very, very naughty. In fact, I thought this was bound to get complaints from the General Medical Council. Surprisingly, it hasn't. The subtitle of the book is Do It Yourself Because Your Doctor Won't. And that is a shocking state of affairs because all the doctors do is they just look at the blood test. They don't ask, how are you feeling? What's your body temperature? What's your pulse rate like? Did your mother have this problem? Has your face changed? What's your weight? Are you having problems with your weight? They don't ask any of those questions. They just look at the blood test. And of course, the normal ranges for thyroid hormones is very wide. So the normal range for free T4, for example, is about 12 to 22 picomoles per litre. But the fact of the matter is we all have our own personal reference range. And we know this from a paper that was published in The Lancet. They looked at healthy people and they measured their thyroid function every month for 6 months. And we all have our own personal reference range, which is very different from the population range. Your personal reference range might be 20 to 22. It might be 14 to 16. And Professor Sir Anthony Toft, who wrote the British Medical Associated Guide to Treating the Underactive Thyroid, in his book he states some people don't feel well till they're running at 30 picomoles per litre. So some people have got a range of 28 to 30. So all the blood tests tell us is if there is scope for a trial of, and then as I say, we gradually increase the dose and look at the clinical response to that. But this is being routinely missed by many doctors because if the population reference range is 12 to 22, if your result came back at 12.1, you would be told, oh, you're normal, nothing wrong with you.
Fine, yeah.
But you might function much better at double that level. But you're still in population reference range. So the blood tests are not definitive. They're just another guide, which we then have to put to the test. But there are very, very few people who are being properly and correctly treated like this. There's a very wonderful self-help group called Thyroid UK that offer support. But the bottom line is you've got to do it yourself. Because your GP will just look at the blood test, say, you're normal, off you go. And that is not helpful and it's not correct either.
If a problem is identified, Sarah, how do you go about treating that condition? You mentioned hormones, so are we looking at pharmaceuticals there, or are there natural products that you can purchase?
Use natural products. We can use natural dried thyroid extract, and these are available all over the world. And in fact, they're far superior to the pharmaceutical products because they're much closer to nature. They have bioidentical hormones T4 and T3. The bad news is they're a bit more expensive. But the point is we can do it ourselves. In this country, we have a product called Metavive, but in other countries, you have thyroid glandulars, natural desiccated thyroid, thyroid S. They go by various names. And in my appendix of the thyroid book, I detail all the preparations that are available, where you can get them from, how much they cost. And believe you me, I've trialed them all, and I know that they all are effective. So again, we don't need a prescription pad. We can do it ourselves. And the awful thing is we have to do it ourselves because our doctors won't.
Well, that's quite chilling in a way that these things are being missed because you describe that people are potentially stopped from living the lives that they could be living.
It's worse than that, Bill. Not only are they prevented from living the life that they could be living, and guess what? We need energy to have fun, don't we? We need energy to get things done. Not only that, but the underactive thyroid is a major risk factor for heart disease, for cancer, and for dementia. Those are three big killers of today. And, we're seeing so many people off work. Why? Because of chronic fatigue syndrome and ME. And the underactive thyroid is a major driver of that as well. So it's actually, my view is it's criminal that the thyroid is not being treated properly by doctors who should know better. Now, I suspect there's an agenda for this. Thyroid hormones are entirely natural. You can't patent them. Big Pharma cannot make money out of prescribing thyroid hormones. But what they can do is, if the underactive thyroid drives all these pathologies, they can make lots of money at cancer, lots of money with dementia drugs, lots of money with heart drugs.
Yes.
Personally suspect there may well be a hidden agenda. Even if there isn't, well, I think there is.
You mentioned that the underactive thyroid, Sarah, can at least, I can't recall whether you said it was responsible or plays a part in weight gain. I was contacted by someone who had sent me a direct message asking if they're a lady that has started to put on quite a lot of weight. They described that their words were, I've put on a lot of weight in the last few months. They haven't really, their exercise levels haven't changed. They don't feel that their diet has changed much either. But one thing that has happened is they've been diagnosed with PCOS, and they've asked, can that have a bearing on their weight?
Indirectly. PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, I know there are at least two drivers of that. The first is a carbohydrate-based diet. I mean, when I was at medical school, there were no cases of that. When I was at medical school in the 1970s, it was go to work on an egg, bacon and eggs for breakfast. But the second major driver of PCOS is iodine deficiency. And guess what?
Right.
We also need iodine for the underactive thyroid. So it's possible that there's a common cause for the PCOS and for the underactive thyroid. But if your listener has gained weight recently, then of course we must think of the thyroid, because as I mentioned, the thyroid gland is the accelerator pedal of our car. It sets how fast our engine goes. It determines our basal metabolic rate. And our basal metabolic rate is all about keeping warm in order that we can function, so the enzymes can work, and that uses energy. So if you slow the BMR down, then every single cell in your body burns less energy, and you need less calories to survive, and you put on weight. So putting on weight is a feature of the underactive thyroid.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Well, there are so many subjects I could talk to you about, but I know from being on the farm, you're a very busy lady.
We can do another hour, no fear, Bill.
That would be wonderful if we could
Of course.
revisit. I'd very much welcome that. That's very kind of you. Perhaps to round off for today, Sarah, may I ask if people would like to find out more about your work, if they would like to have a look at, you mentioned you have an underactive thyroid book, which I have. I'm an avid reader. I have been since before I could go to school, my mum tells me. And I very proudly have a Sarah Myhill shelf in my book collections. If people would like to purchase your books, have a look at your books, where or find out more about your work.
Of course, just go to my website, drmyhill.co.uk. If you put Myhill in, Myhill as opposed to your hill, that is, Myhill, then the website comes up. I looked the other day, it's had 32 million hits. There's no advertising on it. It's completely free. And there are details of my books, coming for a workshop. And what's actually quite popular is I run starter workshops, which is an online where I just talk all day. I'm doing one tomorrow. And I max out at 20 people, and so I can see them all, because it's much more fun seeing people, isn't it, than talking to a blank screen. And the deal is anybody can ask any question at any time. And I go through, although it's mainly for people with fatigue syndromes, it's also the starting point to prevent and treat absolutely everything. So we have cancer patients there, we have Parkinson's patients there, we have dementia patients there, as well as chronic fatigue syndrome patients. And people present their tests, and I interpret their test results for them. And it's a very chatty day. In fact, I really look forward to those days, because as you've worked out, Bill, I'm gobby. I like talking a lot. And I'm so lucky, because my medicine is still my hobby.
Have you had your August workshop? Has that gone already? Has that been and gone?
And I think there's
your weekend.
We had the August one. Yeah, it was right at the beginning of the month.
Because I was thinking that you would have, if you were doing that perhaps this weekend, your eco pool is, I would imagine, incredibly inviting at the moment.
No, it's very nice at the moment. Yes, it's very nice at the moment. And there's a September workshop, which is at the beginning of the month. The water will still be lovely and warm then. But let's say we have a hot tub, so you can if you chill off in the pool, you can recover in the hot tub.
And for anyone that's listening, if they haven't been to one of Sarah's weekends, it's amazing.
We
She's
have
got a
fun.
great team. Anna and Mia help by preparing lovely food. Bettina is there making sure that everything you need is done for you. They really are a great team, and can absolutely recommend, if you haven't been to one of Sarah's workshops, please treat yourself.
Thank you, Bill.
Sarah, thanks ever so much. It's been wonderful as always. Fantastic to catch up with you. And if you can spare the time, I'd love to get you on again at some point.
No problem. Just ask me and we'll fix a date.
Wonderful. Okay, Sarah, I hope to see you soon. Do
Yep.
take care.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye for now.